In the previous video, we determined that we could use X sales call to predict the Y variable copier sales. In this video, we're going to determine the equation that will allow us to predict future copier sales. First, we're going to need to complete the model summary table. This cell right here asks for the y-intercept, and you can find the y-intercept right here, 18.947. And in a little bit, I'm going to talk about what all the numbers in the model summary table mean. But for now, we're just going to reference them. So this is the y-intercept. I'm going to give it a fill. And then right here, sales call the coefficient. This asks for the slope. And the slope is right here, 1.18. And then right here, the p-value for sales call, this is asking for the p-value for the individual test. So I am going to reference that. All right, so we completed the model summary table. This provides all the information that we need to write the equation. So now I'm going to talk about that in more detail. So in our model summary table, we referenced the y-intercept. The y-intercept tells us the predicted value of y when x is 0. So it tells us the predicted value of copier sales when sales calls is 0. In other words, if someone makes 0 sales calls, they are predicted to sell 18.95 copiers. The slope tells us the predicted change in y if x increases by 1 unit. If our slope is positive, that means y is going to increase. So an increase in x is going to predict an increase in y. If the slope is negative, then y is predicted to decrease. So if x increases by 1 unit, y is predicted to decrease. So you can see that the sign of the slope is telling us whether there's a positive or negative relationship between x and y. In our example, our slope was 1.18. So that tells us for every additional sales call, copier sales will increase by 1.18 units. So this is what the y-intercept and the slope mean. Now we are going to write our regression equation. This is the generic regression equation. This right here is y hat, and that stands for the predicted value of y. This b sub 0 is the y-intercept. This b sub 1 is the slope for x, or the predictor variable, and then x1 is the predictor variable. So to write our regression equation, again, the generic equation is y hat equals the intercept plus the slope times x. That's basically what the equation that I just went over. That's what it was saying. So in our example, y hat is predicted copier sales. So again, we're writing an equation that's going to allow us to predict copier sales. So we are solving for predicted copier sales. And it's going to be the intercept, which is 18.95. I'm going to round to 2 decimal places, plus the slope, which is 1.18. times sales call. So this is our regression equation. All we have to do is plug in sales calls, and we'll be able to predict how many copiers that individual will sell. So going to our questions, question 1 asks, what is the correct regression equation? We just wrote that. So that is going to be A, right? It's estimated copier sales. It's the intercept plus the slope times x. So A is the correct answer. The next question asks, what is the slope for sales call? It's right here, 1.18. For every additional sales call, how many additional copiers is the salesperson estimated to sell? This question is basically asking what the slope is. If you remember, the null hypothesis is the slope for x is not significantly different from 0. In other words, the slope equals 0. If you have a slope of 0, that means if x increases by 1 unit, nothing is expected to change in y. So that would mean that there is no relationship between x and y, so x does not significantly predict y. So that's why a slope of 0 means that x does not significantly predict y. What is the y-intercept? Again, right here is the y-intercept, 18.95. And in this question, if a salesperson makes 0 sales calls, how many copiers are they predicted to sell? So this question is asking about the y-intercept. So this is basically the definition of the y-intercept. So again, I'm going to reference the y-intercept. Next, we're going to complete the prediction table. So you can see that we're going to predict how many copiers each salesperson is going to sell. And we're just going to use our regression equation to do that. So that's why we do regression. We conduct a regression, first of all, to see if we can use x to predict y. And if so, then we're going to actually predict y. So we can plug in our equation. So again, it's our intercept, 18.95. And I'm going to lock it because I'm going to copy this function down. And the intercept is always going to be the same. It's a constant, so I'm going to lock it. So it's the intercept plus the slope. The slope is also a constant, so I'm going to lock it, times sales calls. So here is that individual's number of sales calls. So Eva made 20 sales calls, and she is predicted to sell 42.63 copiers. And then I should just be able to copy it down. And you can see that all my references are correct, and we are going to want to format this to 2 decimal places. So the regression equation is the equation for the regression line. So if you remember in previous modules, we inserted this trend line in scatter plots. This is the regression line. This is the regression equation. This line can be viewed as the predicted values of y. So you can see that we can go to our chart and we can get a rough estimate of our prediction. So if someone makes 20 sales calls, you can see they're going to sell a little more than 40 copiers. If someone makes 40 sales calls, they're going to make about 55 sales. So again, this is the regression equation. This is the regression line. It's the predicted values of y. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to create that scatter plot, and we're going to insert the regression line and the regression equation. So I'm going to scroll up to our data. I'm going to select our x and y variable, and I'm going to go to insert, and then I'm going to insert a scatter plot. And we're going to want to drag it all the way down. Again, sometimes instead of dragging it down, I do Control X or Command X on a Mac, and then Control V or Command V to paste. All right, just some quick formatting. Sales calls and copiers sold. We want to insert axis titles. So I'm going to go to chart design, add chart element, and I'm going to add a horizontal. Again, I'm going to immediately hit equals, and then I'm going to reference sales call, and I'm going to do the same thing for the vertical. So I immediately hit equals and then copiers sold. If you're wondering what variable is on the x-axis and what variable is on the y-axis, the x-axis, the axis down here, it's always what column comes first in your data set. So this is going to be on the x-axis, this is going to be on the y-axis. You can switch them if you can format the chart so that it's switched, but that's the default. So Excel's always going to put whatever column comes first on the x-axis. All right, the last thing we're going to want to do is insert that trend line. So you can do that by going to chart design, add chart element, And then we can go to trend line, and we're going to add a linear trend line. And then if you double click on that trend line, you're going to go over here to the options, and we're going to display the equation. And you can see that, didn't mean to change that. You can see that the equation is the same equation that we found. So that's one way you can check your answers. So if what you're getting is different from this, then there's probably an issue. So you probably made a mistake somewhere.